we should be broadcasting. So.
Broadcasting live to everyone here. All right. So good morning, everyone. Starting off our Zoom here while we get our Facebook Live connected. This is, I think, third week? I've lost track, Ben.
Yeah.
They kind of blurred together already. Third week we got with the Woodall's webinar series here, Fireside Chats. We got a couple guests today. We're just kind of giving Ben a few seconds to get the Facebook feed hooked up. If you are watching on Facebook, there's going to be about a 20-second delay or so between what we're actually saying and what you see on Facebook. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the comments on Facebook, or if you would like to join the Zoom portion of it directly, then we might be able to bring you on and you can ask your question live, just have it be a little bit more interactive in that regard. So with that being said, Ben, are you ready to go?
Yeah, just about. It screwed up on me. You gotta love technology. So I love technology. So
Ben, you're a millennial. You're supposed to have this stuff figured out.
I know, I am, but
I mean, there we go. Okay, I just got a notification on mine. It says live on Facebook, so we're good to go.
All right.
All right. It's your show, Ben. Take it away.
Yeah, I mean, it's the third week, so this is great. We've got we got a few great guests here. We're going to have Jeff Sims is on. He's the Senior Director of State Relations and Program Advocacy for the National Association of Campgrounds and RV Parks. Michael Elliott, he's the Campground CPA Managing Partner of Camp and Park Accounting. And we've also got Dee Witting, who's Executive Director of the Carolinas Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds. So she covers 2 states, I believe, North and South Carolina. So that should be great. I know the Myrtle Beach area just opened. Some of the campgrounds over the weekend were opening and taking in guests. So that should be great to hear from her. And of course, we've got our normal co-host, Brian Searle from Insider Perks, and Kara, I can't pronounce my last name. Brudagem?
Oh, come on, Ben.
It's okay, Ben. It's been worse. Brodagam.
Brodagam, okay. And she works with the Canadian RV Council, Canadian Camping and RV Council. So I guess just to get things started, I guess we had a general question for Jeff. Obviously, the National Association of RV Parks and Campgrounds has been working on a huge amount of things during the COVID crisis, working with a lot of state associations, park owners. I guess just kind of tell us what it's been like trying to sort through all the information.
Well, it's been a real challenge, to say the least, and I will say at the national level, where several things that ARVIC has done by providing a coronavirus update on our website, that we removed the firewall so it's available to everybody in the industry, not just ARVIC members, because this is a industry issue and very important.
Wait, was there actually a firewall that was set up, Jeff? I just want to clarify.
Yeah,
did you actually,
the members only sections, we made sure that it was available to everybody.
But it was a hack-proof firewall? That's what I'm just making, like it was really hardcore, like we have to keep people out, or? I'm just kidding. Go ahead. We're just trying to have fun.
Those member resources, we got to protect those.
That's true. I mean, I'm all for joining the association. I just didn't know if there was a hardcore, like, cement wall you guys had built up in front, like a fortress, or? All right, go ahead, Jeff.
It doesn't require a lot from me, of course, but I am an old dog and can learn a lot of new tricks. I will just tell you that one of the single largest challenges has been, when it comes to executive orders, has been those that have allowed the local jurisdictions, municipalities and counties to add additional restrictions. And I think New Jersey and Georgia were the only 2 I've seen that I can recall off the top of my head that they actually wrote the executive order to eliminate that opportunity. They absolutely can't add additional restrictions, which is a good thing. But then you get into some of your big states with lots of counties and lots of cities, and it really has made for a real challenge.
So what you're talking about is the top-down effect, right? So where Georgia has said the governor's order overrules everything local, county-wise, all that, but most states are basically saying this is what it should be, but then they can make it more restrictive as you go down to counties or cities, right?
Yeah, and this is normal of any regulations. We generally see that like I serve on a planning and zoning board, and a city within that county can have additional restrictions. They generally can't
Yeah.
make them less restrictive. However, I read this morning in Colorado that in the latest executive order that there are certain hoops you jump through, but it actually states that a county can make them less restrictive if they have met certain guidelines, like 14-day consecutive of a decline in new cases of COVID. But by and large, what we're dealing with, we have worked very closely with the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, RVIA, RVDA. We have put together action alerts that members and non-members can send letters requesting the essential business classification for RV parks and campgrounds, and also support our other partners in the industry like the manufacturers and dealers. And I believe right now just on the campground side, there's already been 45,000 letters gone out to elected officials.
Wow.
Wow.
I know, that's what I said when I saw it. I go, wow.
Yeah.
And it gives the park owner the opportunity to voice their opinion about this. And everybody's been cooped up for a while and they're ready to speak out. So, I mean, it's really good. And a lot of times we have situations where people say, Jeff, I'd like you to come and speak to my local jurisdiction and what have you. And the reality is that really doesn't help you generally, because the local jurisdiction, people say, who's this person from the national telling us what to do? They need to hear from constituents, and that's the voters and the people in this RV Act. It's called RV Action Alert. When you send it out, the original one went from the president all the way down, clear down to your city councilmen and mayors and what have you. We have done this specifically where we compile that specific letter for that specific state on a specific executive order. And I believe we've done that in California, Illinois, Indiana, Virginia, Vermont, Maryland, just to name a few, because it's a grassroots effort where you paper their walls and get their attention is a good thing. Most of the time. Sometimes they don't like to get all that, and another thing I'll mention, I mean, we are just in the final throes, and if you can say you get excited about something, we are just finishing it's Reopening RV Parks and Campgrounds, a guide for the outdoor hospitality industry. David Bassler's been working hard on that. And the issue there is states are opening up at different times. And so not everybody sees the industry in the same way. I mean, I was working with New Hampshire a weekend ago, and their regulations require them to have their restroom facilities open if the park's open, which is a challenge right now. And so, and we also want to be sensitive. We're working with the Coalition for Go RVing, and we want to make sure that we send the right messages and be sensitive to those areas. So it's not a one size fits all in any of this.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take in consideration that region, what's going on there, and because some places are minimal impact from COVID-19 and others are tremendously impacted. And I see right now frustration levels rising. Some park owners will call me and they're really upset.
Yeah.
And I get it. I was a park owner for 40 years. And everybody, we all start off with, hey, we are the best industry for this situation because they're called self-contained units, a recreational vehicle. We are positioned in the best manner for this. But unfortunately, we're regulated by people that don't understand our industry, and it's imperative that we educate them. And how are we going to do that? Well, right now, we're doing everything we can to let's get you open and do it in a way that minimizes the risk. I hate to use the word safe because I don't know how you can just cart plant say everything's safe, but
Safer.
Okay.
Safer.
But minimize the risk for not only the mom and pop out here with their park, but their staff and their guests. And, I'm getting calls from customers that are irate that the campground's not open. And I tell them, don't you think that park owner wants to be open? That's how they generate revenue. Of course they want to be open. And so, I always try to, I get a lot of phone calls. If any of you have ever talked to me, you know that when I'm on the phone with you, you're the most important person I've got to talk to. So whatever time it takes, I'm always willing to do that. But we had our public affairs committee last week and did it on a Zoom meeting. First time we'd ever done that. And several things came out of that, but one that I'm really looking forward to is I had proposed to form a new CISA task force. And the reason I bring that up, that I have to be honest with you, had never even heard of CISA till I started seeing all these executive orders. And it's a cybersecurity infrastructure security.
Of Homeland Security, right? Yeah.
It's underneath the Department of Homeland Security. And when you read these executive orders, and Dee, we talked earlier about all these that I'm reading. Well, they're so similar, I kind of know where to go to look for some of the stuff. But basically, governors have just copied and pasted from the CISA information. So the task force, and I mentioned on Paul Bamby, our president, and David Bassler, our vice president, and I are on calls with the industry each week, multiple times. And I mentioned the other day that Arvik was going to form this CISA task force. And our goal is to get RV parks and campgrounds listed as essential businesses. Doesn't help you right now, but this isn't probably the last situation that will ever be faced in this country. There's also natural disasters. That's where they go to get all this information from, is the CISA. So our goal is to help not only the RV parks and campgrounds, but manufacturers and dealers to get included as essential businesses, because obviously a lot of emergency personnel use these units as well. And when I talk to park owners, and any of you have talked to me know that I've said this many times, they're saying, I don't know what to do. People are mad at me because I'm not opening on time, or I don't, they don't like my refund policy, or whatever that is. And I just try to put it in perspective. I tell them, tell me which headline you can live with. Customer upset over cancellation policy of ABC Campground, or ABC Campground is the epicenter of the COVID-19 epidemic. Which one's survivable?
And there's middle grounds too. Like, we've talked to some of our clients where, I'm waiting for the review that comes in that says Jeff put his hands on my kid to socially distance him from another kid, right? It's going to happen because, how much are you going to enforce that? And
And of course, my job is really public affairs and legislation. And I'm seeing legislation now that is, going to try to limit the liability for businesses, when some customer, and we're talking about industry as a whole, not just our outdoor recreation industry. When someone gets sick and claims that it's your fault, Massachusetts has introduced a bill for business interruption insurance to include COVID-19. I rather suspect that is going to hit major opposition
from the insurance companies. Yeah, especially retroactively. Yeah, it's because they're bankrupt a few, wouldn't it?
I'm not the expert in that field, but the ones that I've talked to, it's certainly, I would say yes, that will be. And the only other thing, and I don't mean to talk much, but, I feel fortunate that I don't just have a job, I have a passion. This is what I do.
Yeah.
And I really, I woke up at 1 o'clock this morning, wide awake, and I thought, might as well get started work. But, I think about all these people, these small businesses, and some of them aren't going to survive. And I think about, what can I do today to give the greatest opportunity for that? And at the same time, we want to get these businesses open, but we want to do it in a manner that protects, everyone's health as best we can. So That ought to
So
get you kicked off, Ben.
No, so let's bring in Dee for a second. Unless she had a question, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I think the education part of this is just the biggest thing. I mean, even with the CISA or what, that's just educating. And it just was, I think the COVID crisis has kind of just exposed how much more work we have to do to kind of communicate to officials, I guess, what we do as an industry.
Well, so the CISA thing is actually really interesting. I didn't know this existed either, Jeff, until I don't know, about a month ago or something like that. It came across, so in Ohio, there's a public-private partnership where businesses can join and be a part of the Homeland Security CISA alerts and all that kind of stuff. But you can also then be classified as an essential business, and they have an online platform where you can print out a Homeland Security credential so you can actually go outside if they really locked it down. So that's how I came across CISA.
Yeah. Well, and Dee was able in her, one or two states to get some waivers originally, which gave businesses an opportunity to be classified as essential.
Dee, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I can ditto what Jeff is saying. And thank you to Jeff, because Jeff is a good person to pick up the phone and say help, and Jeff is always there. And I think that's where, as an executive director, I want to be there, just like what Jeff said. We need to be there for our members. We may not always have the answers, but we can sit and listen, and sometimes you just need to talk. And so North Carolina, we did get, and I sent a letter to many of our campgrounds, did get listed as an essential business, but within a matter of hours, county governments were shutting them down. But mostly in the western mountains, and a lot of they were afraid of the hospitals. It's a smaller community. They were afraid of the hospitals being overwhelmed.
But is this recent, Dee? Like this just happened that they were reclassified by the counties, or is this?
No, this was all starting back in April when all of the essential business things. But now Cherokee County, small county where I own my campground in Murphy, they have allowed their campgrounds to reopen before the stay-at-home order is to be lifted May 8th. So like Jeff said, it changes daily. County by county, state by state, and I know to have Jeff doing what he is with as many states, it's a big job with one or two states. I can't imagine what he is doing, but South Carolina, as of today, the stay-at-home order has been lifted. All of the restrictions from the hotspots and that have been lifted. So as an association, we are moving forward, as is ARVIC, as to how we can help educate our members, educate the public on how we are operating safely. And we actually have hired Jeff Kreider to help us with this. And we're being very careful with the timing, how we're approaching it, but we need to let people know, the campers know what's going on within our campgrounds, and that we are following CDC guidelines. So Jeff is going to help us. We're not only going to do that now, we're going to push that even into the fall season. So it's going to be an ongoing thing. And then we're actually going to give templates to our member campgrounds that they can approach local radio stations, just educate local people, just like what Jeff is saying is so necessary. And ARVIC has always been instrumental in telling us, I owned a campground, get out there, know your county officials, be on the chamber, let them know who you are, what you're about, invite them over. And that advice helped me a lot. And the campgrounds that have done that are obviously seeing success with the local governments and county governments.
What are you seeing as far as tourism goes in South North Carolina? Are you seeing the sense that people are, obviously they're cooped up, they want to get out locally, but are they crossing state lines? Are they coming from different places, or?
Brian, what we have seen is, because so many were shut down and Myrtle Beach has just opened up, that's a little early to really give a sense of that. We feel that we're going to target the Carolinas because we feel that's the area that we need to really push our member campgrounds. And all indications are that people are going to be tending to stay more locally. So
Agreed.
we are
Yeah.
really going to push our, our member campgrounds in the Carolinas. And then as the season changes, then we get as we're just doing it day by day, to be honest. We're just monitoring, and you can't look into the future right now. So when the snowbirds start coming and all that, we can change, but for right now, we're going to concentrate on the Carolinas.
Well, when I talked with campground owners in Pennsylvania, campground owners in the Carolinas last Friday, they were preparing to open or, already open in some way, I guess. And they were just kind of, they realized that the whole industry is kind of watching them and they didn't want to screw it up. I guess do you feel that pressure, Dee, I guess, as a state executive? I guess.
I've felt a lot of pressure recently, but we all have. We've all had to take on rules that we had no idea that this was not in my contract, but yes, I do, but I feel that we need to help our members. And so as a state association, we need to step up to the plate, and hopefully what we are doing is the right thing, and be confident with that. And like I said, it can change day by day, minute by minute. But we're going to reach out and to some resources, that are good at things that they do, and hopefully have them assist us, such as Jeff Kreider, and we're going to reach out to others also.
I guarantee you that some things will have changed just by the time we end this program.
Right.
And I got a phone call just before we started here, and I finally told the guy, I said, look, I've got to get on this fireside chat. But they said, look, swimming pools, we think we want to open ours. And I said, well,
I want to know what you think about that too, Jeff, but continue your story, because I had people ask me that too, clients. So go ahead.
Okay. I don't claim to be the expert. I did have
now you are. It's on. We're recording this. It's going to be all over YouTube, and so whatever you say is about to be gospel.
Oh boy. Well, I will say we had 3 swimming pools on my parks when I was in that business for 40 years. So I've built and cleaned many times. The information I read from the CDC that the pool water is not the problem, that chemical properly, the COVID-19, it's a non-issue. What is the issue is the social distancing. And the second issue is the perception that, people are out vacationing now. And we still have a long way to go to educate our authorities having jurisdiction. And we've already seen that, like in Illinois, where they determined, the Department of Commerce, that camping is recreational, and they even used the brand KOA in it. And I talked to Toby O'Rourke about that. I said, can you believe that? So I gave my opinion. In my opinion, there would be a better time to fight that battle. I would not open my pools at this time. Unless the local jurisdiction came to me and said, yep, you can do it. And then if they did that, and I see this all the time with park owners, they say, well, my local official said I could do it. And I said, did you get it in writing? And they say, well, no. If they're willing.
So let's say you can socially distance. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, if they're willing to put in writing that you can open it up, but then you might want to consider it. But in my opinion, everything that I've seen across the states is right now is not the time to give the impression that we're vacationing.
Got it. Okay. So, but if you could socially distance safely by either putting a staff member there and saying, you have to be X number of people apart or whatever, and you're regularly cleaning it, and we have the chlorine thing that you mentioned, is there, like I was talking to somebody this morning, if I had to, and I'm not saying I do, but if I had to choose an amenity to open, I think that if I had to, pool would probably be my, it would force me to choose one amenity. That would probably be one of the safer ones, yes?
Well, I would just say that right now I would not open my restrooms if I could avoid it. That's the one.
No, I'm not. I don't disagree with you at all.
And playgrounds, and I think that at this stage, I would encourage people to go. If you didn't have hiking trails, to walk your roads and maintain our social distancing. I think that when I was a little kid, I loved to swim, and we all know that they're supposed to be supervised. I just think that you're going to add additional costs that there may not be a real benefit to you right now to try to police that. And some of them, if you have a pool, you already have to have a lifeguard. And what is the criteria for protection for that person? I can't tell you that. So I would still, I like your scenario, but the reality is I still wouldn't do it.
And
No,
Jeff,
and again, go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
No, Jeff, I was going to say, I talk to my parks all from a business perspective principally, but anecdotally, what we're hearing from our parks and even all the parks we interact with is that really there's two battles, and I think that's what you're alluding to, that as the industry we're fighting against. One is the actual battle against COVID-19 and cleanliness and safety, but then the other battle is the perception battle, which is there's seemingly an army. I know in my local county, there's seemingly an army of people that are experts on all things COVID-19 and health and safety. And the battle we fight against is what is the, and I think maybe that's, and I'm maybe putting words into your mouth, but maybe what I think what you're saying is maybe even if we can open, maybe it's not worth the potential damage from a reputational or just a perception standpoint to have those facilities open. Is that kind of what I'm guessing kind of what you're hitting on?
Yeah, and the state of Illinois, the Secretary of State put out a memo to people, turn parks in or turn businesses in.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I had a call from a park in the state of Washington on Saturday, and I get to talking to this person, finally realized it's a guest there. It's a guest staying at that park, and they're wanting to know, I don't know if this park should be open because they let somebody in right beside me in this other site. And I'm like, yeah.
How do they get your phone number, Jeff? Like,
I think Ben posted it on Facebook. I don't know.
Yeah.
Blame Ben.
All my communications have my cell phone.
Look, I mean, to be perfectly honest, Ben's kind of the weak link in this whole show. Like, I was looking at Michael. Michael's got a really nice background. He's got a plant and a picture, and it looks beautiful. And Ben actually we were talking about this. Ben got emails, or Sherman got emails about Ben, talking about he didn't have his hair cut short enough, he wasn't wearing a collared shirt, and his background is messy last week. And so he's cleaned it up quite a bit, you can see. But we're still working with Ben to kind of improve that a little bit.
I guess, Jeff, we got a question on Facebook, and I know in Michigan, for instance, they said June 22nd. The state parks aren't going to open until June 22nd. Is there any work that can be done as far as, state parks don't open till June 22nd, but, private parks are different. Maybe we can open up earlier. Is there any work on that front? I know campground owners are frustrated in Michigan, obviously.
Well, absolutely. And let me start with on our coronavirus update. We have a state-specific update there that tells when the stay-at-home orders end.
Right.
And here's what I've been dealing with. I get calls and people say, I heard that, or rumor has it, and we can't deal in that. I have to deal in facts. And I need to know it was Executive Order 55 or whatever that is. And I actually include the links so that anybody looking on this can say, okay, here is what it says. Sometimes it's open for interpretation. In Michigan, I think that the question came up with primary and secondary residents as well, and a lot of seasonals. And it's a real challenge up there. And if you've seen any news, that state has certainly been in the news. And we haven't been able to make a lot of headway. I know that I work with Greg Catt, the executive director there. Yeah. And he and I have talked multiple times. they actually hired a law firm to get a legal opinion. They didn't file a lawsuit, but you've got people out here that are making a determination, like this camper in that one park that is staying on that park, that saying, is this park legally, is this an essential business? And can they actually do that? And a lot of times, unfortunately, and I've been in this business since I was 10 years old, and I have dealt with it my entire professional career. There are a lot of people out there that think that, oh, these RV parks, these white trash, trailer park trash kind of situation. And that's not who we are at all. And so getting over the perception, and a lot of times I'll be sitting on planning and zoning, and all of a sudden there's a proposed RV park, and now all of a sudden property values are going down. All of a sudden the kids can't ride their bicycles, safety, traffic, drugs, and all these things. And it's totally erroneous and nothing to support any of that. But getting back to the question, like Michael stated, is the perception out there. And if people, your neighbors, a lot of times they don't like your park. And Dee's heard me say many times, get involved in your community, get involved. And, I hate to tell you, but I've got over 150 years of board service on boards all across the country. And so get to your neighbors that know you. But a lot of these parks, it's their neighbor that turns them in or says, hey, I think that they're a non-essential business and they're open, and they have no clue what an essential business is in our industry. So the perception is there.
Yeah. Dee, I guess, what's the perception been like for your parks in the Carolinas? I know the Myrtle Beach parks just opened. So, I imagine that had to make some of the local residents a little jittery, I guess.
Yes, and Barb Crum from Ocean Lake. She's my board vice president. Same thing, just trying to educate the community on what we're doing as an industry. Like you said, it's a battle that we're going to be fighting, but I think we have to go for it. And I've been listening to all the webinars. I'm educating myself as much as I can to help our members. But they're talking about, put things on your Facebook pages, do things that are being done. Let people know that you're self-distancing. So I think as state associations and as ARVIC, just to help educate the Back to Camping Summit, I think that's going to be very important, just to help people. How do we go about doing this? And if a good idea, what we want to do is share. There's so much good knowledge amongst our campgrounds. Hey, if somebody up at this campground's doing something that they're finding great success with, we need to get that out to the other members. And I think as an industry, that's going to be very important.
So how is this coming up there in Canada, Kara? I just want to involve you real quick because you've been a little quiet this morning. We haven't really given you a chance to talk either. So I've been following some of the things that you've been posting on Facebook for the Canadian Camping and RV Council too, where you're saying there's a lot of provinces who are opening back up. And then there's, I think, the one, right, that said they were going to wait till June.
Yeah, we have a very similar scenario where it kind of really depends on your province and your municipality. But for the most part, we are seeing several of the provinces opening up in kind of a phased approach. Some of those provinces are including private campgrounds in their first phases. So we have, Manitoba campgrounds are able to open today with some restrictions still in place. The dates for those are kind of staggered over the next 6 weeks or so. Yeah, we're seeing dates into June. The provincial and national parks are quite a bit later in June before they're talking about opening those in most of the provinces. The activity. Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. That's a huge deal. The late June. For some of these Canadian parks, they've got like 2-3 months tops, right?
Yeah, our average season here in Canada is 152 days.
Yeah.
And that's kind of really, the average numbers are impacted quite a bit by a lot of year-round parks in British Columbia. The rest of the country doesn't really see a ton of year-round operation. But yeah, it's really limiting in terms of operating days and how many days they can kind of earn any revenue and offer services and things like that. I think the social media stuff, the information sharing has been the biggest hurdle from my perspective, because things are changing so quickly. And, you know, I tend to I see a ton of positive reaction to those posts talking about campgrounds opening, but we do get the odd kind of, you know, for every 10 happy people that campgrounds are opening, there's 2 or 3 who are upset about things like strain on their rural communities and stuff like that. So that the information piece for sure is the most vital, but definitely the biggest challenge. I agree.
So how are your local communities up there reacting to campgrounds being open or opening soon, like we're talking about down here?
It's the same tightrope walk where you're kind of trying to keep this balance between, you know, maybe camping enthusiasts who are incredibly excited to get out because they've been trapped for so long, and then, you know, obviously park owners and operators, and then you've got the other side that are really, you know, I constantly hear this, like, well, if we open all these parks back up, did we just do this whole thing for 6 or 8 or 9 weeks or however long it's been, for nothing? Like, are we gonna see a big outbreak? I don't believe that there's grounds for them to begin lifting restrictions and doing a phased reopening if they weren't confident, if officials weren't confident that probably wasn't going to be the case. But it's 50-50. Half of us are ready to go camp, but the other half are happy to stay home.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess it's just Michael, on your end, you've been dealing a lot with the loans and the PPP and the SBA stuff. I guess, you know, how has that been impacted throughout this as we're looking at reopening? I imagine you're still getting a ton of questions from owners still.
Yeah, so from our end, dealing with sort of the business side, the financial side of working with privately owned campgrounds and RV parks, it's been interesting to say the least, in the sense that pretty much at this point, most parks are hurting pretty badly financially. I mean, there are certainly, you know, we talked to some Florida parks and things, which are like, I had a couple of conversations with Florida parks last week that said, hey, this actually is coming at a great time because all my snowbirds left. These are my slowest 2 months coming up anyway. And so you've got some parks that have seemingly weathered the storm, but the vast majority of the parks that we work with are taking significant financial hits, both in the current day, meaning they're having to refund a lot of forward reservations, but then also the decrease of forward-looking reservations. A lot of parks use that money in the spring to sort of improve their parks, and so a lot of them have had to way scale back, and so they've done the scaling back, and so now they're trying to figure out, well, how do we keep the doors open? How do we keep people employed? And so a lot of them have turned to the various SBA programs that were initially put in through the CARES Act and things like that. And so the two principal programs people were looking at were these emergency EIDL loans, and then also the Paycheck Protection Program loans, that PPP. And a lot of folks, so we encouraged our parks, as soon as we were aware of round 1 of PPP, we pretty much set up a plan with all of our parks and said, hey, look, the majority of you need to take advantage of this because basically everybody qualifies and everyone's going to apply. So a lot of park owners got in line pretty quick. but then we immediately started to have problems, and you've seen in the news, and I'm sure you've all heard from your park owners, them talking about what their problems were. Hey, my bank said they're not participating. I'm working with a big bank. So some of the really, really large banks like Bank of America, Wells Fargo, some of those big ones weren't able to process applications as quickly as some of these park owners would like. And so there was a lot of dissatisfaction amongst our client base and amongst other campgrounds and RV parks that are not our clients in terms of, hey, we're having trouble getting these loans. And so we ended up doing a lot of work trying to select banks, trying to streamline the process. And then that money ran out pretty much instantly. We were projecting 72 hours, and it was maybe 100 hours. I mean, it was pretty darn quick. Round one was out for PPP, so now we've got round two of PPP, and a lot of the parks who weren't able to participate are now kind of going back, and so that's good. We got some interesting news. I mean, Arvik did a great job posting a good summary of some language that came out from SBA relative to defining the term seasonal as it was used in some of this language, because they just frankly, in the original CARES Act, it was pushed through so quickly, nobody really kind of understood what that meant. And they had some really, really kind of wonky look back periods to calculate the amount of money that you could get. And frankly, the look back period was like starting in February, and that doesn't work for most campground and RV parks, because the vast majority of them in the US, that's not sort of the peak season. And so we kind of got some revised guidance that says, hey, look, you can choose a different look back period to calculate your payroll for purposes of this loan and get significantly more dollars. And in fact, one of my parks said that, hey, when she went back and recalculated it, it was going to be an additional $25,000. So significant dollars for a small park. But now we're faced with this, hey, we've got new rules, but what about all the people who we were discussing this earlier before we jumped on live? What do we do with all the people who have previously applied and now maybe shorted based on the new rules? Well, based on our understanding today, there's really probably nothing you can do if you've already had your loan funded. If you haven't had your loan funded and you're still in the application process, there's a chance that your bank may work with you to submit a new loan application and things like that. And so if you're sort of in limbo, that's absolutely something I would probably leave this call. I don't recommend leaving this call, but as soon as this call is over, you jump on with your bank and see if you can revise your application. Again, if you've already been funded, you're most likely out of luck. But that could help some park owners. And so that's been interesting. This second round of PPP is likely to not last. I'd be surprised if it lasts more than a couple of more days, frankly. And so that's going to be, there's definitely a time factor involved here as well. There's talk of round 3 of PPP. I was very confident round 2 would be passed by Congress. I am not very confident about round 3. I think that there's a lot of buzz about, that hey, we're reopening the economy, we don't need to dump more money in, and so I'm not optimistic about a round 3. And so we're talking with park owners right now and just making sure that they're taking advantage of the opportunities they can. And I know Jeff mentioned earlier, he said, hey, some parks aren't going to make it. And, I'll tell you, working on the financial side with a lot of parks, different sizes, different states, all these things around the country, I believe he's dead on. There are definitely going to be some parks that simply don't make it. Bankruptcy is likely to be an option for some parks that were over leveraged coming into this. If you were over leveraged coming in, you could have a hard time recovering. We're telling park owners right now, you need to think about getting as many sources of capital, as much liquidity as you can possibly get from a variety of sources in order to keep the doors open. And so we're saying, hey, you should be taking advantage of PPP, the EIDL. You should be trying to get a line of credit, refinancing loans. Anything you can do, setting up opportunities for personal loans, potentially looking at your 401k and IRA funds, because to keep the doors open, depending on how long it stretches out in your state, you may need a lot of different sources of liquidity. And the illustration that we're using is we're telling parks, like, every source of liquidity that's available to you is just another lever that we can pull, right? So if things get worse, we can pull another lever, and we can keep pulling levers in order to hopefully keep you in business and keep fighting another day. So it's definitely a trying time financially for all parks. I mean, this is going to be a really rough year, especially for a lot of parks in the Midwest. A lot of them are getting somewhat good news about being able to keep their seasonals open, right? Those kind of those 6-month folks. So in Ohio here, for example, I'm sure Jeff was involved in that. We kind of got clarity and we're able to stay open. And so that's huge, right? So that allows us to not have to refund money that was previously brought in. And so we'll likely allow a lot of parks to be able to keep their doors open. They might not, the profits might not be there at the end of the day, but hopefully it provides enough liquidity. So it's a really interesting time. And so, yeah, absolutely. On the PPP and EIDL, those are things that we need to be looking at pretty quickly here. Let me add one thing, and I don't mean to ramble on. I can get a little.
No, it's useful information, please.
Yeah. So one thing that's important to understand is, so when the initial PPP money came out, it was, quote, free money. It was basically like, hey, this is going to be non-taxable, which was great, meaning businesses were going to be able to get a $50,000 loan that was going to convert into a grant, was going to be non-taxable. Everybody's happy. Well, we're finding out now that the IRS and Department of Treasury have come out and said, well, actually, it is going to be non-taxable, but the money, the expenses that you pay with the dollars you get, those aren't deductible. So that's just a fancy way of saying, actually, it's fully taxable to you. And so that's gonna be a significant problem for parks who, frankly, some parks got $100,000. And so now all of a sudden that $100,000 is taxable income. And in theory, if your tax rate's 30%, you're going to owe $30,000 at the end of the year on that $100,000. Now you may have losses.
Are you saying they're going to be taxed on the income, or they're going to be taxed on the payroll that they use the loan for?
Yeah, it's 6 of one, a half a dozen of the other. So the actual dollars you get aren't taxable, but the expenses you pay with it aren't deductible. And so you're essentially, you had all these other expenses which you normally would be deducting, you now can't deduct. And so it's sort of a 6 of one, a half a dozen of the other. But it makes it not free money. At first, everybody's understanding, because that's what the act basically indicated, was it was free money. Well, nothing's free with the government, is what we're finding out. And so that will be a significant headwind, and definitely something people need to be planning for as they kind of approach their year ends, in 6 months from now.
Well, good that they got that seasonal time period adjusted. I know, Kara, weren't you dealing with something similar up there? Did you ever get anything resolved with that for your parks, or no?
We're still kind of in the works. We are advocating for some specific seasonal business financial support programming from the federal government. Just because, same thing, a lot of our loan programs and support programs were repayment dates are starting, in October, when our campgrounds are closing and facing another 6 months of no revenue and things like that. A lot of the members that I've talked to are quite small and nervous to take on carry any more debt, so they don't even want to apply for a lot of the loan programming that exists. We'd really like to see a program specific to seasonal business that maybe has a more strategic kind of repayment plan and extended, interest-free period and those kinds of things. But we don't currently have approval for any of that stuff. There's our advocacy team is in kind of daily communications with federal ministers' offices, trying to keep the pressure on there. And we've kind of done the same thing. We've created a letter for our campground owners and sent those. We're sending those actively too. 45,000 is a nice number. But I'm hoping that quite a few will head out that way. But yeah, the financing part is a huge. I mean, some of our parks applied and got access to there's a $40,000 emergency business account and got their money within 3 days. And then other parks who have applied and it's been weeks and haven't seen anything, so things are delayed. And those things are all hurdles right now when there's not making any revenue and still have all their bills to pay.
I'll add one other thing, if I might, is that, at Arvik, we're continuing to work on extending the 12-week period to be even more suitable for seasonal businesses that receive the funds and don't have employees on the payroll yet. I'm sorry?
Is the 12-week period for the PPP program that you guys have down there?
With the seasonal, you could use that for your calculation. As
I
opposed to
see.
the-
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, that's what we're doing. We're working on trying to get that seasonal portion for businesses who receive these funds. And the main thing is they don't have employees on the payroll yet. So for the season. So you don't, and the ones that have already got that and we're successful in getting it. And Michael enlightened me in advance before we got on this, because I had an inquiring mind to know more about it, because it's a real challenge to some of the parks that did receive it. And now this seasonal nature of this potential, and may or may not be able to renegotiate that with the lender. And I doubt that. And I apologize. We've got a pretty good thunderstorm coming up here. So if it gets loud.
I can't hear anything, Jeff. You're good to go. But you bring up an interesting point about employees, though. So how does this, and I'll just open it up to Dee or Michael or Ben or whoever, or Kara, whoever wants to jump in. How does this impact, we're closed for half the year, or maybe we're starting to ramp up, but we don't need as many people. How does this affect the hiring of work campers and employees for when you are ready to go?
Yeah.
I mean, we're hearing anecdotally that from a number of parks that are saying they can't, a lot of their work campers have made the decision already, and some of them even back 4 to 6 weeks ago, that they're not traveling. And so that's certainly going to putting a strain on several of our parks. And I imagine if we extrapolated that out across, the industry, we're going to see a significant problem with that this summer in terms of a lack of travel from those work campers. So I think it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
I agree.
I know I've been talking with some campground owners, and they say basically the same thing. I know I talked with a campground owner late last week who mentioned that her work campers kind of showed up early, and that they were able to kind of quarantine them at the park. And so they were kind of able to get their work campers there. But yeah, I mean, people just don't want to travel. I guess I guess there's other worker issues too, as far as employees maybe not even wanting to come into work. Do you guys run into some of that too, I guess, where they're nervous to even come into work?
Yeah, I mean, certainly with the additional unemployment benefits that are available through the CARES Act, right? So the CARES Act is basically supplementing unemployment to the tune of $600. And so if you're, depending on your state, your average unemployment benefit may be, I don't know, $200 to $400 per week. And so now all of a sudden, when you're talking about $800 to $1,000 per week through July, that's significant, and I think is going to cause some employees, not all. I mean, as a whole, I think, here in the U.S. I mean, specifically, I'm sure it's the same way in Canada. We like to work for our money, and so so it's not the case for everybody, but there's certainly going to be some parks where they're going to experience, and we've already had some where they're going to experience a difficult time bringing back some of their employees who will say that, look, I'm concerned about my safety, so maybe that's, maybe there's a legitimate reason there, but then B, maybe it pays better to stay on unemployment. So that's a realistic possibility. I think it might be too early to see, but it's certainly something here in the U.S. I think we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Definitely, I'm seeing that in terms of summer student hiring and stuff like that. That's usually starting up right now. It's far more beneficial to them to kind of stay on our program is the Canadian government's giving $2,000 per month for 4 months. And then I don't know what their strategy will be after the 4 months is up, but a lot of those kind of younger summer students who maybe don't make that much money are happy to stay on that program while it's available.
And I think the other aspect of that too is the foreign workers. So I know not every park, but a lot of our larger parks, or maybe even some Jellystones that have a lot of water features, rely on those they bring in some foreign workers, and that pipeline is just shut off completely. So that'll be interesting. I guess, Dee, do you have any parks that bring in foreign workers that are struggling with that?
don't have that many. I don't hear much of that going on in the
Okay.
Carolinas, Ben.
Okay.
So what about employees in general though? Dee, you've been a little bit quiet, so yeah, I know you got a ton of stuff to share over there. There's a wealth of knowledge. So
I just ditto. I kind of agree with what everyone is saying. I believe that the work campers, I mean, I owned a campground. I think when they do come, they're going to stay for longer periods of time. It's always a challenge. The number one phone call that I get as an executive director, hey Dee, do you have anybody? We need help. So it's always been a challenge. This is going to throw a whole new curve into that challenge. I think, and I agree with the unemployment benefits. Are they going to choose to stay at home? It's just, I sort of agree with what everyone is saying, but I do feel the work campers will come, but they're going to stay. I mean, I had several, they'd come for 2 months and they'd move for 2 months. I think they're going to come and they're going to stay put. And in South Carolina, our campgrounds are open year round. So we face a whole different, challenge there. And a lot do go for, a lot of our campgrounds use like the local, for the summer season, do use the local students and that. So I think that would be pretty successful. I think they're ready to get out of the house and go do something. So they lean on the universities to kind of give them some help. And all of that. So I see that as continuing to grow.
Well, I know my 16-year-old, he can't get any of the unemployment money. So
Right.
he's been working hard for the last couple months. They've been giving him extra shifts where he works because there have been some sick people or some people who can't make it into work, and he's been filling in for them. So, I mean, there's a lot of availability for high school students at some of these places. So, Brian, you were going to say something?
no, I was just I noticed we've had Wade Elliott on here for a couple of weeks, and I wanted to just unmute him and let him see, because he talks to so many parks, if he wants to kind of chime in on any of the discussion we're having, just from an employee standpoint, but also kind of what he's just seeing industry-wide, trend-wise. So I just kind of let him talk there if he's still listening and wants to unmute himself. We'd love to hear his input into the discussion. But other than that, Jeff, you were talking about David was also putting together a plan, right? What were you saying? Guidelines that we're presenting to reopen? Yeah. David's on here too. So let's see if David can chime in if he wants to add anything to that discussion. And Wade just dropped off, I think so.
Yeah, he didn't want. Can
you hear me?
Right.
That's all right. So David, what's going on? Tell us what you're doing.
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
All right. As Jeff mentioned, ARVIC is putting together a comprehensive guide. We've been working with a number of other industry organizations to create this guide, and we're going to be putting it out later this week to help campgrounds as they begin to reopen. As Jeff mentioned earlier, it's not a one-size-fits-all, obviously. So these are suggested recommendations, new procedures, guidelines for reopening various aspects of a park, questions to ask local governments, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I guess, I imagine you guys are still getting a ton of questions. What are some of the things that's covered in that guide that are really key for owners, I guess, that you're hearing a lot of?
Well, the whole thing is geared toward helping owners reopen, and it provides them with direct links to the latest official regulations that they can check in their area. It provides a hands-on evaluation for each area of their park. It provides suggested guidelines and new procedures for things like the check-in area, the store, how they handle RV sites and campsites and other lodging like cabins and park model RVs, all the way from how they check people into those things to cleaning procedures, reopening of bathhouses, food service in restaurant areas, laundry, various amenities.
Comprehensive.
So it's very extensive in how to reopen those particular areas. It also covers things like, what to do if an employee or guest becomes ill, focusing on mental health needs for employees and guests, communicating with guests prior to arrival and with the community. It was mentioned earlier on the webinar that, handling the communication with the community and properly communicating how the park is operating in alignment with CDC guidelines. And it also, the guide also provides sample templates, letters, and it is one thing I'll mention as well. It's directed both at campgrounds in the United States and in Canada, so there are resources for both depending on the locality.
Awesome.
And is that the type of tool that can be used to kind of help ease like local officials' fears too? Like there seems like there's a lot of material in there. Like when a local official comes up to a park owner and wants to know details of what reopening looks like, that there's details there that can help them explain it to them.
Yeah, that's exactly what the goal is. I mean, all of the major industries in the country are doing something similar to this. The restaurant industry, restaurant association, the hotel lodging association, the airline industry, every major industry is putting out a guide that shows not only government officials, but local communities that, hey, we're reopening, but we're taking this very seriously. And here are all the steps that we are recommending as an industry that, in this case, RV parks and campgrounds follow in order to open and have their various aspects of their park align with CDC guidelines for social distancing, for cleaning and disinfecting, all of the things that will allow people to come back and enjoy the outdoors and enjoy our campgrounds and our RV parks in a way that's as safe as possible.
Yeah.
We produced and released something similar in Canada several weeks ago, and have kind of been updating it as things are changing. But I've had a couple of parks here in Alberta presented to their local health authority during their inspection, and they've all passed their inspections and are open and operating already because of it. It's been really helpful.
When will the RVIC guide be released?
Later this week.
Awesome.
The aspect, Kara, the aspect that you just mentioned, we have something similar in our guide as well, and I briefly touched on it a second ago. The evaluation forms where they can go through, campground owners can go through each aspect of their park and evaluate, how they're going to reopen, how they're going to post information, particularly how they're going to update cleaning schedules, all of those kinds of things to evaluate whether or not it's safe to open up that aspect of their park currently. And they can obviously continue to do this as the weeks go on and things will change. But those are the documents that, if it were me, those are the documents that I would use if talking with a local government official to say, hey, I've followed these industry guidelines. I have evaluated each aspect of my park that I feel are okay to reopen. Here are those documents, and to your point, those can be very valuable in having those conversations with the local government officials.
Yeah,
Totally.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to open and not have to recreate the wheel every single time.
Exactly. Yeah.
I also believe that our industry has been forever altered. I think going forward,
all industries, but yeah, you're right.
It's going to be about document. I think it's going to be imperative for a business to document for a variety of reasons. Number one, dealing with your public officials, but ultimately with your guest. I think to have that level of confidence, and feeling of security or feeling of being safe, that they're going to want to see what your protocols are. And, you know, if it says that that restroom's cleaned every 2 hours, they probably want to see somebody out there cleaning it every 2 hours.
You bet.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that more that in those aspects, you know, we are going to have to be on top of that, and businesses are going to have to and it's just good business to document stuff anyway, you know, but document your training for your staff, document your personal protection equipment, document everything that you're doing, you know, your safety data sheets on whatever products you're using to sanitize and disinfect. And in the one guide that David referenced, you know, it links to the EPA's guide on all these disinfectants and things like that. And so,
Yeah.
A lot of park owners aren't really going to like that. But it is going to be, whether you want to call it the new norm or the new abnormal, whatever you want to call it, that's what they're going to be faced with.
Yeah, I mean, and hopefully it makes the park experience better too, you know, cleaner facilities, things like that. You know, those aren't bad things either. I guess at this point, we like to note that we've been on for about an hour. We're going to keep talking. If you don't want to, you know, continue to watch, that's fine. You know, this is recorded, so if you want to catch the rest of this later, that's okay as well. I would like to try to bring Terry Blaschk on. I think that's...
You're bringing her on and you can't pronounce her last name either?
Maybe if she wants, I believe she owns a park in Texas. Maybe if she wants to talk just a little bit about what she's been going through from her park owner perspective. And I believe she had messaged me and said that they haven't been closed the entire time, but maybe if she wants to talk a little bit about her experience. I don't know if she's on or not. Maybe she doesn't want to talk. That's fine.
It's possible. We did that to Wade, and he just bailed instantly. And Wade's not shy.
No, so. He might have been on a phone call. So we could also bring on Al Johnson. He works with RE Recreation Adventures Company. They own a number of KOAs. Maybe if he just wants to talk a little bit about what that company's been doing just to get through the COVID-19 issues that they've been working through. I guess, Al, do you have any comments on what you've been working on?
We've been faced with just about everything that has been talked about this morning, and different jurisdictions, different timeframes for getting open, different concerns about employees, one concern is that we'll have too many employees for the level of business that we'll have, that are hiring, that we might be wasting that. On the other hand, we may not have enough. What's the season going to do? By the way, our flagship park at Mount Rushmore just opened Friday, and we had a better weekend than we did a year ago. Not that it's big numbers, it's tiny numbers, but that was very encouraging. And we're learning how to put in place all of these safety and cleaning procedures. We have some parks that the state and county specifically want RV parks open, but the local community doesn't. But that local community seems to be allowing hotels to be open. You know, we're in trouble for having a few campers in the park, but the Hampton Inn has 30 cars parked in their motel parking lot. It's really been quite a thrash trying to figure it all out and keep ahead of it. Jeff's been helpful. State associations have come to bat for us and for our concerns. We have a park in New York that's in one of two counties where the county health administration won't issue our permit to operate. So it's okay from the state level for RV parks to operate, but the local county won't issue our permit to open and operate. And I think they don't have the authority to do that, but this is the wrong time to probably challenge those authorities. You know, you just, you come out wrong from a perspective, from a reputation perspective, if you push back too hard at this time. So it's been real interesting. Do you have any specific questions?
Well, so I mean, I'm sure Ben does, but Al, have you tried to take a proposal like we were talking about that Kara's putting together, or Kara put together, that David is putting together? Have you tried to take anything specific to that local place in New York and say, this is what we're doing, these are the steps we're taking? Because I had a client in New York who also could not get their health department to issue that permit, and finally he did get it. I don't know what the trigger was, but.
What we've been working on and hoping for is that Don Bennett, the state executive there, will ask those questions on our behalf, so it doesn't become a local campground questioning the authority of the State Department to take that approach, but more of a question of the state association saying, hey, can you really do that or not?
Got it. Okay.
And that's been good.
And Al made a real important point there. It is critical, and people like Dee and myself and others, that we not put a bullseye on an individual park and put them on the radar, that we talk industry wide, not campground specific.
Yeah. I guess you guys deal with so many parks. I mean, you have like a little more than a dozen parks, but they're spread out throughout the country. So I imagine you guys have just been working overtime trying to keep up with different changes at each of the parks, I imagine. Some are open probably, some aren't open.
Here's an interesting one in Washington State. That's where the park was that I was telling you about, where the hotels are operating and we're getting pushed back on the RV park in one community. We have two parks in Washington State. The other one is in Seattle, which was an epicenter. And that park has never had any restrictions on it. It's never been closed. It's been considered essential. In fact, we're doing a construction project there, and the contractors pulled off for a week or so because of the shutdown. And the government told us and issued us a letter that the project was essential. And so we were able to get the contractors back to work on that project. So same state, just completely different business climates.
Yeah. What are you hearing from I imagine you guys are getting flooded on Facebook with comments from campers wanting to come camping. I guess, do you see that excitement that they want to get to your parks?
Our reservations are still strong for the year. We've kind of canceled a little bit on a rolling basis, but I don't know if that'll turn into any kind of decent season or not. The attractions, the celebrations in the local communities, all of those gone away. It'll be a different reason to travel this year, but it doesn't necessarily mean people won't travel. At Mount Rushmore KOA, I did a scientific survey that we all do. I walked through the park to see where the license plates were from. I fully expected to see that our business was coming from the local 5-state area, just getting out for a weekend. I think there was one car there from South Dakota, but there was Michigan, there was California, Indiana. They were from all over and not from the local area. It was interesting.
Wow. Okay. All right. I think Terry, she messaged me and said that she had a problem unmuting. She wants to talk, so we're going to bring her back in and we can ask her. I think I can unmute her. So Terry, I guess just clue us in a little bit on what you've been dealing with. Your park is in Texas, correct?
Yes, San Antonio area.
Okay.
And how do you pronounce your last name, just so Ben knows?
Yeah, just so I know for the future.
Blaschke.
Oh, that sounds way better than what you were trying to do, Ben.
I tried my best. I tried my best. So I guess I think you had Facebook messaged me or commented on something, and you had mentioned that you've kind of been open this entire time. What's the COVID crisis kind of been like at your park?
We did close our bathhouses. Because we just didn't feel like our staff could keep up with the disinfecting. We left open the laundry facility since that was one of the essential things that kept us essential here. And we just ask everyone to call us when they're done using that facility so we can go in and disinfect. Our other public things like our little clubhouse, our pavilion, and any activities that we had are suspended, closed or suspended. But otherwise, we refunded and canceled a large amount of reservations. We had nothing in the month of April for our travelers. However, we fortunately have a good extended stay base that kept us alive.
Yeah. What's been the employee situation? We were just talking about employees. How many employees do you have, and have you been able to bring them in, or what's that looked like at your park?
They are all family.
Okay.
Not part of my household, but family. So, we could pretty well work together. We do have some people who live on the premises and work for us, so they're already exposed to everything, so it wasn't a problem with them coming in. But at this point, they're all wearing masks when they cannot socially distance, especially if they're indoors, just to make sure that everybody else, it's like an example thing,
Yeah.
Yep.
What are you doing at your park to maintain those social distancing guidelines? I mean, camping is a very social activity. That's why people like to come. They like to talk and get together. What do you do at your park to make sure they don't congregate in large groups?
I'm the worst. I just want to hug everyone. So I have to continually stop myself. But we have a walking group in the morning, for example, and we just make it a point to socially distance and take pictures of us socially distancing and try to really talk it up. We have a lot of signage. We don't have a large staff, so I can't go around and police it. But as much as possible, we try to, in a lighthearted way, make sure that everyone realizes how not lighthearted it could be if we don't.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And I guess, we also talked a little bit about the SBA PPP loan process. Did you guys apply for any of that? Was that frustrating for you, or was it pretty easy? I guess we've heard a bunch of different stories.
It was a little frustrating. I did it on opening day, and it took me a full 24 hours of trying to get in, trying to apply, but I got accepted right away according to their response email-wise.
Yeah.
And within 2 weeks, the check was in the account.
Did you work with a local bank or one of those big national banks?
I worked with my bank,
Okay.
a local bank, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's weird to think, I guess on my end, and maybe Michael could say something, but to me, you would think like the bigger banks may have had an edge over maybe some of the smaller banks, but I've heard a lot of stories about the smaller banks being able just to crank these out and really help customers better, I guess. So.
This is a Texas bank, but it's fairly local to San Antonio, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
So speaking of, we're getting back to the PPP and the EIDL loans. Michael, I just want to, before we're going to wrap up here in about 10 minutes, I think, at the max or so. But Michael, give parks 5 financial tips they can take away, not necessarily related to PPP or EIDL, but just ways that they can make their books or their, everything more efficient around the park if for some reason the guests don't come back in the numbers they did. What are ways that they can improve their efficiencies to make their park run smoother?
Yeah, so the number one thing we're telling everyone is budgeting is crucial. As a CPA, I've always believed that budgeting is critical. A lot of times the people I work with, my park owners, the business owners, they don't necessarily love me when I preach budget to them, but I think that now budget.
I don't like my accountant when she does it to me either. So
yeah, I get yelled at a lot when I talk about budgets, but right now budgets are incredibly important. And so we're encouraging park owners probably the number one thing beyond kind of getting liquidity sources available. Beyond that, we're saying you need to really think about your expenses relative to how critical they are to your operations. And so we look at both short-term and long-term impacts of an expenditure. And so we try to break down the impact on your business, both in the short and the long term for each type of expenditure. And so obviously the expenditures that are going to have long-term impacts on your parks, so think about things like your real estate taxes, right? If you don't pay those, there's a long-term negative impact on your park. So those kind of expenditures need to be advanced, right? Those are critical expenditures, things like your liability insurance. Those are critical expenditures that you're going to have to pay. And we start breaking those expenses down for our parks, looking at their budgets and saying, okay, if this happens, right, if revenue returns to X, we know that we've got critical expenses covered. So then we go look at discretionary and what we call semi-discretionary expenses, and we start breaking it down further from there and saying, okay, if this happens, right, if we're closed to Memorial Day for recreational camping, here's what happens. If we're closed till July 4th, here's what happens. If we lose the whole season, here's what happens. And sort of scenario plan. That's probably the first thing that we really encourage parks to do. Obviously looking at expansion, and kind of future timelines. That's the other thing that we look at in terms of that capital expenditure and their capital expenditure budgets. We say we need to evaluate those to determine timing. Is this the right year? Do we need to defer? Things like that is where we're going. We're obviously talking also about kind of back to the liquidity sources. Are there other state and local opportunities for you to get grants in your local, municipality or your state? There's some states talking about lodging taxes and sort of maybe not requiring the lodging establishments like campgrounds to pay those lodging taxes, and so in a sense have some form of grants available. So that's another thing that we're looking at. And really, I would say kind of forecasting, kind of going back to the budgeting, but forecasting out what the year is going to look like and say running these various scenarios is incredibly important right now. Because what we don't want parks to do is we don't want parks to be in a position where they have to react to things and make bad decisions. Meaning I don't want to be on the phone with a park owner 3 weeks from now who finds out that, they're closed for Memorial Day. I would rather plan for the worst now so that we're not stuck making difficult decisions. And so I don't know if that's 5 things. But one other thing I will say.
Good enough. It's good advice. So yeah, keep going, please.
One other point I will throw out here, because I don't know if Jeff and Dee will say this for themselves. They probably will. They're probably pretty comfortable saying this. But having, one expenditure that's absolutely critical that we're not cutting is we're not cutting association dues. In my opinion, associations. So I'm on the board of the Ohio Society of CPAs. I'm on the governing council for the National Association of CPAs. And I get it. I get the challenge of trying to convince people to give us their dues dollars. And there's oftentimes complaints and things like that. We hear it all the time. But the value of associations is never seen more than when we're in crisis. This is when associations really earn their money. It's on the advocacy side. And they need our support now more than ever. So in a world where where I'm talking to parks about cutting expenditures, I also am talking to parks saying, if you're not a member of your state association, this is an expense you need to add right now, not cut, because it's mission critical, because they're the boots, oftentimes the boots on the ground. They're the collective voice of kind of we the people in the campground industry. And so that's an expense that we honestly can't afford to cut that expenditure from our budgets. And so that's super critical, and coming, with my background in association as well. We need to give them the credit, the love, and the support that they need as they're advocating for us. And so that's maybe another financial tip I'll throw in there as well.
Well, I think Carol will probably agree with you too. I know she said she signed up a bunch of members that she's had trouble getting before. So
yeah, my membership drive has been really positively impacted by this, and it's too bad that it takes a crisis to make it that way, but I'm definitely seeing a major uptick in interested campground owners.
And I think, go ahead, Dee. Sorry.
Same here in the Carolinas. I've had several calls from non-members. In fact, Jeff sent one my way a couple weeks ago, and they're starting to see that it's hard being alone out there. That it's good to have a network. And like I said, I don't always have all the answers. But if I don't, I can talk, I can refer them to the right people. They can see what we're doing. We're giving them the documentation. So they are seeing the value. Obviously, the follow-up with them as time goes on is going to be very important for Arvik and Karvik to hopefully finalize the deal. And then the big thing is going to be out of our current members, same thing. Will they be willing to rejoin? All of the state associations will be facing that.
And I think another thing to mention, and maybe Jeff or Dee can correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys weren't able to get any of that government, the associations aren't able to get any of the government funding. And I know the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, I believe, was trying to work on getting some of these associations. I don't think I've heard an update on whether that's ever going to happen or not. So
I do know that it's in the works, that we're working hard to get the 501c6s included. Obviously, with a lot of our state associations, they were not able to hold their conferences, which is usually one of their major revenue generators. And so we're highly motivated to try to get that incorporated. But I think Michael stated earlier, that this next round is probably going to be a little more challenging to get through. And I will also say that, I've been, my family's been a member of Arvik since 1968, and we've seen a lot of ups and downs. I've seen a lot of people come and go. And the reality is, the way I see it is, I never really, Michael's absolutely correct. It's an expense, but I never looked at it as expense. I looked at it, my membership, as an investment in my business and in myself, because I found those things to be beneficial both to me personally and into my business as well. And I have a saying that, all state associations are always challenged to get renewals and people to conferences and all these things. And I say that if they want to be there, they'll find a way. And if they don't, they'll find an excuse. And I was the executive director of the Missouri Association back in the 80s for 10 years. And our greatest growth came when we had a big problem. And because all of a sudden it impacts their wallet and pocketbook in a tangible way. And I think all of us in this industry would say that the greatest benefit of being involved in your association is the networking, that meeting other park owners and working with them. And it's the most intangible. Where do you put the dollar value on that? But the networking, and Dee's correct. I tell people they'll come and say, well, somebody said you knew everything. And boy, that's not true at all. I just know the people that do. So that networking is so important for all of us.
Yeah, definitely.
Networking and support. I think the big word is support, just to feel that you're not the lone person out there you know, that somebody's on your side, they're fighting for you. And like I said, sometimes it's just a voice that they can listen to or talk to, and you know, be able to vent a little bit. And that's very important, especially in these times. And that's why we belong to, we have association, Campground Association Management Professionals, for the same thing. I reach out to them all the time. They're one of my best resources. They've been doing this a lot longer, and there's a lot of knowledge there. So any association, like Michael said, is just so beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's been great just seeing all the different ways, because the getting together and doing that interpersonal stuff is important. It's been interesting to see all the different ways that associations and organizations and people are still trying to do that. And it's really led to some really interesting webinars and conversations and all this variety of information that's been great. So.
Yeah, some of it doesn't need to go away. It just needs to stay. It needed to be done all along, and this has kind of forced their hand. So I hope some of it sticks around.
I think it's something that they get it, you know, when somebody gets it, because they're in it they're in the trenches experiencing the same thing, and you can just say, hey, you get it. And so just having that is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
Anybody want to add anything? We're about 12:30 here, and want to wrap it up. So anybody want to say some parting words? Dee?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great having everybody on. It's great to see faces and talk with people. So I think that's, Jeff, you got anything final you want to say?
We're one day closer to the end of this.
I quote Jeff all the time.
I keep telling everybody, keep the faith. We're in it together. And it's not just our industry, it's all industries. But take heart. I do believe, and I believe this deep down in my gut, that our industry is poised for a real significant rebound. And while I do think that some may not survive it, I think those that do will be okay. And we're going to get through it together.
Yeah, 100% agree. Yep. All right.
It'll be interesting to see how everything, how this impacts the glamping trend and whether people are more apt to put up cabins and stuff. So hopefully, you know, a lot of people can make it through this, and I think people are going to be real eager to go out camping. So
that's a good question, though, Ben. Like, we need to get somebody on here from either maybe the Glamping Association or from a glamping company, or maybe Lancaster Log Cabins, that guy, to talk about, you know, some ideas they might have to change how cabins look and glamping looks in the future.
Yeah. So. All right. Well, it's been great having everyone on. Thanks, Michael, Dee, and Jeff, and Kara, and Brian. A lot of great conversation. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in on Facebook and for attending our Zoom feed as well. Really great to be able to bring some people on and talk through a lot of the things that people are going through. So.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.